Welcome to the next lesson in the WiSys Form Studio video training series. Today we're going to continue with our inventory receipt form and add some additional fields, create variables to hold information returned from our validations, and use those variables in formulas that take action based on their values. So let's get started by launching Form Studio. Select our database and our training project. And again, I'm going to make a copy of the form so that we have a before and after. And we're going to go ahead and use that copied form. If you recall, in our last lesson, we added a validation to this item field. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. And to edit a validation, you highlight it and click Edit Action. And if you remember, in our return data, we only return data for values that were on our form. But these other categories are important, and we also need to make use of those later in our form, specifically a serial lot flag. If it's a lotted item, you're going to want to capture the lot number during the receipt. So we need to know whether or not we should expose that field. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish here. And we need to set up some variables to capture the data coming back from the validation. So to do that, you go up under Data, Variables, and we're going to want to enter New. And our value is going to be a string value. And we want to know whether or not this is a stocked item, and so we're going to add a variable for the stocked flag. We also want to add a variable for the activity code. Oops, sorry, type is string. And we also want to check the serial lot flag. And we also want to know whether or not it's a binned item. So we want to check the bin flag. So there we've created some variables to use. So I'm going to go ahead and say Close here. And if the item is lotted, we're going to want to capture the serial lot. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and add another lookup field to my form for the lot, and I also need to add another one for the bin to capture it if it's a binned item. So we'll go back to our naming convention. And then our lot. Actually, I'm just going to call this lot. And if you notice, the last lesson we added text values and we had to say whether those were enabled or not. Since you're adding a lookup field, it automatically assumes that it's an enabled field. So again, I'm going to move these because I want them above my quantity field. And then let's go back to our validation. And our return data, and let's return the value to the variables that we created. You'll notice that fields that are on the form always begin with an @ sign. And now, since we've added variables, the variables begin with a $sign. So we're going to add our stocked flag, our activity code, and our serial lot flag. And I can go ahead and say finish and close. And I'm going to save the form and simulate the form. If I type in B cable and press enter, since the variables aren't displayed on the screen, you might wonder, well, how do I know what the value is? Well, that's what this little window over here is for. So if we scroll down, we'll notice that our group variables here, the value that was returned for our stock flag is yes. Our activity code is A for active, and this is not a serialized or lotted item. So this window over here is the way you can check the status of your variables and other values that the form uses during simulation. So now that I have these values, I don't want to display the lot field on my form if the item is not lotted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my actions, and I'm going to add a formula. And then I'm going to say new, and I'm going to give my formula a name. And I'm going to call it serial lot flag. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the value of that flag. And I'm going to see if it's not equal to an L. Because if it's S for serialized or N for neither lotted or serialized, what I want to do is I'm going to hit add here to add my conditional check. And if that is not equal to L, so if it's an S or an N, I'm going to go to my item visibility tab here, and I'm going to indicate that the lot field should be hidden by checking the box. And then I'm going to go ahead and say save. And since I only have one formula here, the execution, you can have the first true formula. So if you had multiple formulas here, as soon as it runs into a formula that returns a true condition, it would stop. And likewise, if you had 4 formulas and all 3 of them were true and the 4th one was false, it would stop on the 4th one. Or you could set it to run all, which means it's going to execute every formula that you have. So since I only have one formula, I'm just going to leave it at first true formula. Go ahead and click close. I'm going to click close again, save my form, and emulate it. So now if I hit B cable, press enter, keep an eye on my lot field, you'll notice that my lot field disappeared from my form. So now let's go ahead and continue with some additional validations. We have not, in formulas, we have not validated the location, which after we return the item would be the next field of entry on the form. So let's go ahead and under our actions, let's go ahead and add a validation transaction for the location. And again, our category is inventory, and we're doing a receipt. So we want to go down to our receipts, and we're going to select receipt, validate, item, and location. Go ahead and select next. And it wants to know our input properties. So the input properties are going to be the item and the value for the location that the user entered on the form. And then we want to return whether or not what the bin flag is for that particular item. We also want to return the location to our form. And that's it. So we'll go ahead and say finish. Then what we also want to do is add a formula to check the bin flag, just like we checked the serial lot flag. So we're going to go ahead and add another formula. New. And we're going to give it a name called bin flag. And we're going to check the value of our variable. And we want to see if that is equal to no, because a bin flag is either yes or no. If it's equal to no, again, we want to hide the bin field. So if it's not a binned item, we want to hide the bin field on our form. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And click close. And then one other formula that I'm going to add is to check to see if the user entered a location. And if they did not enter the location, I want to use the default location that is established in the parameters in the setup of the form. So I'm going to go ahead and say new. And I'm going to say use default if blank. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check the value of our location field on the form and check to see if that's equal to blank. If it is equal to blank, then I want to set the value of our form, the location on our form. I'm going to set that to the default location on the form. So these variables that begin with at, those are variables that are available to every form. And these coincide with the setup options on the form. So I'm going to set it, so if the user doesn't enter a location, I'm going to set it to the default location that was added to the form. So I'm going to go ahead and say add here. So if, to look at the formula logic, if my field on my form, the location field on my form is blank, and right here's the value of true, if it's true, I'm going to set that field on my form to the default location for the handheld. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. Now it might be a good idea for this formula to fire before my validation transaction. That way, during the validation transaction, when it passes the location, we make sure it has a value in it. So I'm going to move this formula up in the list to before the validation transaction fires. So we're going to go ahead and say close, save our form. And then one thing, since I'm in emulator mode, and I told you we're using a variable that's defined on the form in the default settings section of the form, I'm going to go to the default settings section right here, and I'm going to enter a value of MA for my default location. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'm going to emulate the form. And if we do bcable, you'll notice that this item is binned. So the bin flag is there. But the lot flag was hidden. And now I'm going to go ahead and look up my location. And the location passed its validation. And actually my bin field was hidden because the bin check is on the location that we added. That was the bin flag was a variable that was returned from our location. And as you can see, this item is not bin, so that value was hidden, and our lot was also hidden. So now we have added formulas and variables to our form, and this concludes that lesson.